Welcome back to We Remember Her, the podcast where we explore the lives of women throughout history who never had children, but still left a lasting mark on the world. And today, we're stepping into the world of Queen Elizabeth I. Before she became the Virgin Queen, before portraits, pearls and power turned her into legend, Elizabeth Tudor was a child born into danger. She entered the world in 1533 at Greenwich Palace, the daughter of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. From the moment she was born, expectations were already circling her. Her father had wanted a son. England wanted stability. The court wanted certainty. Instead, a daughter was placed in the cradle, and even that first disappointment would shape the story of her life. Because Elizabeth did not begin as the inevitable Queen of England. She began as a girl whose place in the world could vanish overnight. And in many ways, it did. When she was not yet 3 years old, her mother, Anne Boleyn, was executed. One day, Elizabeth was a princess. The next, she was declared illegitimate. That is a terrifying thing to imagine, a child too young to understand politics, but old enough to be marked by its consequences. Her mother gone, her status stripped away, her future suddenly uncertain, and yet she survived it. That, in some ways, becomes the story of Elizabeth again and again. Not ease, not safety, survival. Her childhood moved through the shifting, dangerous atmosphere of her father's court, where wives could rise and fall, loyalties could turn deadly, and a child's position depended on forces she did not control. But Elizabeth was intelligent, observant, and careful. She learned early what power looked like. She learned what instability felt like. She learned, perhaps more quickly than most, that a woman in that world could not afford to be naive. She was highly educated, which became one of her greatest strengths. Elizabeth studied languages, rhetoric, theology, history, and philosophy. She was clever, disciplined, and deeply aware of the value of self-control. Even as a young woman, she seemed to understand that her mind would have to protect her where her circumstances could not, and there were many moments when she needed protecting. After Henry's death, Elizabeth lived through yet another tense and uncertain chapter when she was placed in the household of Catherine Parr, Henry's final wife, and Catherine's new husband, Thomas Seymour. What happened there remains one of the more unsettling parts of Elizabeth's early life. Seymour behaved in ways that were inappropriate and invasive, and Elizabeth, still very young, was drawn into an atmosphere of danger, rumour, and adult manipulation. That experience matters, because it reminds us that Elizabeth's famous caution did not emerge from nowhere. She learned early that a young woman's body, reputation, and future could all become political territory. She learned that intimacy was rarely simple for women in power or near power. She learned that survival often required distance. By the time she came of age, the question of marriage was already beginning to gather around her. And it never really stopped. That question followed Elizabeth almost her entire life. Who would she marry? What man would rule beside her? What alliance would secure England? What husband would give the kingdom an heir? Because for a queen, marriage was never only personal. It was national strategy, dynastic necessity, diplomatic leverage. Emotional speculation turned into state business. And yet, Elizabeth never gave the kingdom the answer it wanted. She entertained suitors. She negotiated. She delayed. She used the possibility of marriage politically, skillfully, brilliantly. There were men who mattered to her, or seemed to. Robert Dudley, perhaps most of all, remains one of the great emotional questions in Elizabeth's life. Their closeness was undeniable. Their relationship has fascinated historians for centuries. Was it love, attachment, dependency, a bond made deeper by the pressures of power? Perhaps all of those in some measure. But whatever feeling existed, Elizabeth never married him, and she never married anyone else. That decision became one of the defining facts of her reign. But it is worth pausing there, because she never married can sound simple from a distance. It was not simple. It meant living under relentless pressure. It meant enduring criticism, anxiety, and political danger. It meant refusing the standard answer to female rule in a world deeply uncomfortable with the idea of a woman ruling alone. And Elizabeth did rule alone. When she became queen in 1558, England was unstable, divided, and uncertain. She inherited a kingdom fractured by religion, haunted by recent violence, and surrounded by threats. She was 25 years old. She was a woman. She was unmarried. Many people doubted she could hold the throne securely. They were wrong. Elizabeth proved, over time, to be one of the most formidable political minds in English history. She was strategic, careful, and deeply aware of performance. She understood pageantry. She understood language. She understood what it meant to be looked at and judged, and instead of shrinking beneath that scrutiny, she learned how to use it. She made herself into an image, the queen in pearls, the queen who belonged to her people, the queen married to England, the Virgin Queen. That image was political genius, but it was also something more complicated, because beneath it was a real woman whose life had taught her again and again that marriage could be dangerous, that intimacy could make a woman vulnerable, and that power, once shared, could easily begin to slip. So Elizabeth built something else instead. She built authority around herself. She built a court that revolved around her presence. She built a reign that became associated with stability, cultural flowering, naval triumph, and national identity. Under Elizabeth, England saw the flourishing of literature and drama, the rise of figures like Shakespeare, the strengthening of Protestant rule, and one of the most famous military victories in its history, the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. That moment alone helped secure her legend. But perhaps what is most striking about Elizabeth is not simply that she held power. It is how she held it. She ruled in a world that viewed female authority as fragile, unnatural, or temporary, and she made it durable. She performed queenship so powerfully that she changed what people thought a queen could be. She did not become someone's wife. She did not become someone's mother. She became instead a symbol, a monarch, and a force strong enough to outlast the men who had doubted her. What she built instead was public and enormous, and that too is part of what makes her so unforgettable. Queen Elizabeth I ruled for 44 years, from the year 1558 until her death in 1603. She died at the age of 69, leaving behind not only a throne, but an era so distinct that history would remember it by her name. Queen Elizabeth I never had children, but she left behind a reign so enduring that it gave its name to an entire age. She left behind an image of female rule that still fascinates the world. she left behind a legacy of political intelligence, survival, and power on her own terms. Queen Elizabeth I never had children, and still we remember her. Thank you for listening to We Remember Her. If you enjoyed this episode, follow the podcast and YouTube channel and join me next time as we step into the life of another unforgettable child-free woman from history.